In this episode 3, I want to tell you how I was being on ice, to being a D2 rider. I went back to D2 again, to beating the current United States Speedway champion in a world qualifier. That was Michael Bass in '78, to retiring. Because of the SRA being dismantled and Jerry Fairchild, I was on ice. I was age 17 and I was just at home, no speedway, just waiting for something to break. Then my break came. Jerry Fairchild, he called me, he told me that there was a new speedway track opening up at Santa Ana, the Santa Ana Bowl, Eddie Westfield, and Louis Kossuth, the father of the speedway rider, Louis Kossuth. His papa, he started the speedway track and he rented the Santa Ana Bowl right next to the jailhouse there in Santa Ana, and they had quarter-mile speedway. I immediately went over to Louis' shop. He had a 76 gas station over there on Brea Boulevard. And I talked to Louis about his new track. He was renting a big speedway track. Louis told me it was a big quarter-mile track around a football running field, fast. I never rode a track that big. I was always on these small tracks. So this was a new experience. I told Louis to put me on the program. Opening night at Santa Ana came. I was so excited to race. I was excited to be on the program. I opened the program to see my name in D1, and guess what? I was in D2. They put me back in D2. Before, I was riding all the D1 tracks at Costa Mesa, Ventura, etc. And I was expecting to be on I told Louis, put me in D1. And then in the program, I was in D2. And I was very mad. And I said, Louis, I don't like being in D2. I'm a D1 rider. Why did you do that? And he said, I don't know. I said, never do that again. You put me in D1 next week. And he goes, okay, I'll try. And I was so mad. And they put me in D2. I had scratch races. Had 3 scratch races. I won my first 2, really easy. And then the main event came. And I don't know what the rider's name was, but he was good. He gated me. He was in the lead for like 3 laps. And I'm like, you know, Brian, if you want to ride D1, you got to beat this guy. And I just gave it all I had for the last lap. And I passed that dude. I don't know his name. And then I went ahead and I finished the checkered line, and I was so mad and I was just so angry. I did this big wheelie over the finish line, and I did a straight up and down wheelie going like 80 miles an hour, and guess what? I flipped the bike and the bike goes bouncing bong 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 all the way down the track, and it got destroyed. And all the money I made from winning that D2 main and went back into fixing that speedway bike. And the crowd cheered, and I landed on my feet and I bowed, and everybody just loved me, and it was really great. It was the beginning of Santa Ana Bowl. The following week, I got a D1 ride and a scratch ride in handicap and scratch. And I went ahead and I won one of those mains. I think it was a handicap main. And I was like on the 40-yard line. They went from D2 to like the 40-yard line. I won that handicap main. I don't remember the scratch main. I think Bill Cody was winning at the time. And I was like, you know, I can beat Bill Cody. And there were some good riders at that track. Wild Bill Cody was the marquee racer. They had other racers like Radical Randy Marsh. And then later they had, just another week or so, they had the Cowboy, John Cook. He came down from Northern California with his buddy, rest in peace, that was Denny Pyatt. Denny Pyatt was a young rider at the time. He was just starting in Speedway, so he wasn't at his full prime at the time, but Denny Pyatt was good. And there is a lot of local riders and a lot of good lower end D1 riders. And Santa Ana Bowl, they had a good start. Week 3, I believe, was my week. I went ahead and I swept the program. all 3 handicap races, all 3 scratch races. I won the main event and everything. And they bumped me back to the 50-yard line in handicap. I was a 50-yard rider, soon to be 60-yard line rider. And I went ahead and won. I swept that program and I felt pretty good. Points, I did really well. I won the program twice. I swept the program, I mean, and it was just fantastic. The second time my mom was there and she never seen me race in her life, and I told her, I'm gonna win this for you, and I won every race for my mom. And after the race she says, I don't like Speedway, I'll never come back. And I go, Mom, I won all my races. And she didn't care. She was like having a heart attack. Probably the worst moment came around midway through the season, or 3/4, and the referee, who I won't name, he had a son that race, who I won't name, and his son was right behind me in points, and he just seemed, was a step behind, and he just couldn't seem to catch me or pass me. And it was a main event, and the son was leading the main event, and I passed him. You know, it's Speedway, you ride hard, you go underneath guys, and you bump them a little bit, the slower guys, you got to get rid of them. And I did that, and then all of a sudden I'm racing, and the papa, he flew a black flag at me, and that means you're disqualified. And I just kept running, and I won the main event. It was like a scratch main event. And then he pointed the flag and he says, you're out of there for rough riding. And I said, you're cheating for your son. I mean, come on, you're the dad, and then you're following the black flag against me for your son. I said, that's bullshit. And I was very mad. I had it out with that referee. And ever since then, the referee and the son, we never really got along. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. The highlight of the 78 racing season was the World Championship qualifier. They don't say that there was one in 78, but there was one, I promise. And I was on the cover of that particular event. It was held at Santa Ana Stadium, the first of 3 events. And there was great riders like Mike Faria, Mike Bass, Bobby Schwartz, Kelly Moran, and a whole list of others. John Cook, Denny Pyatt. There was just so many good riders there, and I did a pretty good job. And I had actually got 2nd place to Michael Bass in that particular event, and I got 4th place overall. They didn't have that many rides, so every race really was critical, and I didn't do as well. But out of 16 riders, I got tied for 4th, so that was okay. Then the event moved up north to Sacramento Fairgrounds. They had a fairgrounds up there. They don't have that no more. And my first race was against Bobby Boogaloo Schwartz, and Bobby gated me, and I just rode Bobby really hard. I never rode so close to a rider in my life, and finally, after about the 3rd lap, I did the impossible. I pushed Bobby Schwartz off the line. I took the victory on that particular race. Didn't get any easier. My 2nd race was against the current United States Speedway champion. That was #1, Michael Bass. And I remember just a couple days earlier, Michael, he gated me at the on my home track at Santa Ana Bowl. I was kind of pissed off, even though Michael was a champion. I really wanted to gate Michael Bass because I knew that once Michael Bass got the gate, I couldn't win because he's such a great rider. And I said, Brian, you got to get that gate on Bass. So the flag went up, the gate went up, and I gated Michael Bass. I was in 1st place, and I said, I'm not going to let this go. I rode hard. Michael Bass was in 2nd place the whole time. I won that race. I beat the current United States Speedway champion, the great Michael Bass, #1 greatest rider in the 1970s. It was one of my highlights for sure. Scratch beating Bass off the line. And Michael Bass came up to me after the race in the pits and said, hey, Brian, what do you got in that engine? And I said, it's a Fairchild engine. It's really good. After 2 rounds, I had 6 points. I was the maximum. I was tied for 1st. And then the 3rd round came and the gate went up, and I went ahead and just went for it, man. I'm like, I gotta win this. I'm gonna have 9 points. And then somebody from behind, I don't know who it was, one of the northern dudes, he just punched me. He had me flying on my head, and I just got wiped out. My hand got stuck in the back of a wheel, spinning really fast. I thought I broke my arm. I was just in pain, and my night was over. That was the same night that Porky McCabe, he got in that crash. He hit that Bondo in the track and hitting that railroad tile head on. He severed his spinal cord and he was paralyzed for life. I was in the hospital. Porky McCabe was in the hospital, totally messed up. It was just a bad deal. And I had lost my sponsor, Jerry Fairchild. He just was getting out of Speedway at the time. He says, I've had enough of this Speedway. And he was done. And I was like, man, everybody's, you know, injured. Porky's hurt. He later died. Jerry Fairchild, he had nothing to do with Speedway no more. I guess he was tired of all the politics. And I was injured. And I just said, you know what, maybe it's best that I retire too. So I retired early at that time. I should have probably kept going. I felt, to be honest with you, if I continued and went to England, I felt I was going to have a very bad crash. And the same kind of crash that Denny Pyatt had, rest in peace. And he passed away just a couple years later in England. And I felt that that was my lot. So I said, no, maybe I'll go to college and maybe I'll just shift my life. And then that was the end of my competitive Speedway days, which is sad to say because you never know really what would happen.